Hello, I'm Gus Downing, publisher and editor of the D&D Daily, and this is the LP News Network. We're here today with Reed Hayes, PhD, Director, Loss Prevention Research Council, and Research Scientist for the University of Florida, Bob Oberosler, Group Vice President of Loss Prevention for Rite Aid, and Kevin Larson, Senior Manager, Operations for Asset Protection at Kroger. Today's session, which was given here at the NRF Protect 2017, is entitled The Armed Robbery Epidemic, How to Stay Safe. In 2015, firearms were involved in about 123,358 robberies, and many of those took place in retail, restaurant, grocery, and convenience store environments. Armed robbery is dangerous, appears to be increasing, and isn't easy to control. That's why national retailers, including Kroger and Rite Aid, are working alongside the University of Florida's Loss Prevention Retail Council to make robbery attempts tougher, riskier, and less rewarding for criminals. In this session, research criminologist Dr. Reed Hayes explains the University of Florida and LPRC's project and the R&D process, including solutions currently in trial stages. We'll discuss how to use information detailing how the offender makes decisions, to specify what solutions a retailer should use, how to maximize the value of incident reporting data to boost protective impact testing, and how to benchmark anti-robbery tactics and decide how to improve for their business going forward. Gentlemen, thanks for being here today.
Sure. Good to be here.
You know, Reed, can you talk about the LPRC project itself and the R&D process for our viewers?
Sure. I mean, we're working with 45 retail chains, but that's a huge, tall order because we're dealing with fraud, we're dealing with theft, and we're dealing with violence. So in this case, we have a violent crime working group. We've probably got at least 25 major retail chains participating with us and our science team, as well as solution partners. And so what they do is we get on calls or webinars every month, sometimes meet in person and go on field trips. But by and large, what we're doing is studying large data sets, looking for patterns of robberies in every way, shape, and form we can. Things about the offenders, how they're operating, where they're operating, and when, and so on. And then laying out the stages of the robbery in this case. What are the steps that you have to go through to accomplish a successful robbery if you're a bad guy? And then aligning specific countermeasures to each of those steps and calibrating those. So at first we start out and we brainstorm blue sky. How can we make it harder? How can we make it appear riskier or less rewarding to the bad guy? Those are our three tools. Primary tools, and then let's line those up and let's start to trial those at our innovation lab where we can do anything. Now let's work out the bugs, process. Let's go to real store. Let's continue that process, make it work in the real world. Now let's go to challenging environments. So we're putting together, for instance, a research cluster of stores in Baltimore. Baltimore's got issues, and so we're going to use that venue.
You know, when you talk about offenders making decisions, can you walk us through that, so to speak, and talk about the decision tree a robber goes through and how a retailer can impact a robber's decision?
Right. And they're a little different. You can imagine there's a lot of variance there, and sometimes it's immediate, sometimes there's a little pre-planning, other times it's fairly calculated. When we're talking about front-end robbers, and Bob and his team first postulated, you know, let's look at front-end robbers and robberies. Let's look at sort of the opiate abuser, the person that's in there, their brain's telling, I'm dying, I need this type of robbery. And then let's look at a little more calculating a takedown. We're going to take down the pharmacy or the cash office or whatever. So those are our three types of offenders. They're a little different, what they want, how they think, what they do. And so again, now we've got our stages for each of those three to look at those. So as far as calibrating, that's what we're going to do, is dial in on those three types of offenders. They all make choices, decisions. Hey, you know what? I'm going to be a bad guy. I'm going to be a robber. I'm going to commit this crime. I'm going to initiate. I'm going to continue despite what I see or feel. If somebody detains me, I'm going to resist, and so on. So we think they are the ones always making choices, and they do that based on what they think. You've got what I want or need, in my opinion. I think risk and reward, or the calculus is good. It's good to go, and I'm going to go. So we're trying to shape the battlefield, shape the environment in cyberspace, in the where they live or hold up, in their transit, and then entry points, and then as they move through and come up to that, what we call zone 1, that asset, that person, that thing, that money or drugs. So that's the decisions they're taking in things. Now they could be, it's a bad hair day, it could be they're not particularly bright, so there's limited cognitive capacity and all this stuff. They could be under the influence of whatever. There's a time clock in their head, so there's things going on inside their brains, and so we try and take into account all that. And how do we help them notice what we're doing? How do we help them recognize what it is that we're doing and how it could bite them? And how do we make that credible? So they got to see, get and fear this to get that decision we want, not here, not now.
Right. So you modify behavior along that whole chain.
That's stimulus and response, but in simple terms.
Yeah. Can you talk some about the solutions you have in the trial stages? In what about facial recognition, behavior and gait recognition, the biometric piece? How much of an impact can they make, and is the retail industry ready?
Yeah, I think there's a couple parts there. It's pretty loaded question in a good way, but we want these guys to have situational awareness at the corporate level and the local level. We want them to have situational understanding. They're starting to make sense. I'm seeing a pattern or an opportunity here. And so in the 5 zones, there are signals given off. Biological things that they're doing. There's electronic things that they're doing to signal who they are, where they are, what they're kind of doing, and where they're going, and so on, who they're connected to. So we're looking at those kind of signatures. The other part is who I am, our own, hey, this is who I am. I'm shedding DNA, I'm emitting this Bluetooth signal or address and so on. And I have certain features on my face or my eyes or my hands and on, my jeans, my shoes, my gait. And so we're trying to make sense of who these people are, what they're doing. That's part of it. The other part is now how do we use that to deter them, disrupt them, and those that are the dodos, we call them too dumb or just distracted or determined, they blow past that stuff. How do we incapacitate them? Right. So we want to get more and better evidence and get that more quickly to law enforcement and so on. So there's a lot here, but there's a framework that we all work in here together.
What about the virtual lineup? Can you talk to that a little bit and what it is?
Well, I think what you're describing is that sensor array that we know who's coming our way, who's in our parking lot, who's in our location.
Right, the digital signatures.
That's what that is.
Right.
And so we're working on different options. How do you do it? How do you integrate with all your technologies, all your sensors? How do you make it user-friendly? And these guys can describe. That's a big part of what they do, is work with us. We're working hand in glove. There's a lot of science and strategy, but it's very applied and very practical.
Mm-hmm. Obi, can you talk about the virtual lineup, digital signatures and such?
What we're trying to do, so what we're kind of on the bleeding edge of this right now, of being able to take the biometric, as Reed say, you may call it face identification, we call it feature matching, overlaying that with digital signature. Everybody has a digital signature. Your cell phone is a digital signature, your Fitbit, your Bluetooth, your key fob, all of that information to try to identify you, then put the face with it. And then be able to, it's not there yet, we certainly have it at zone 4, and zone 4 and Reed thing is at the door, around the parking lot, but can we extend that even further? How far can we extend that out? And we're playing with that right now. So we're playing with the identification, your digital signature, we're trying to overlay with your features. We haven't studied the gate technology yet, but we are looking at it. And then really creating a dossier, if you will, of this person in order to set off those early alerts. So more to come.
Yeah, interesting.
You got to stay on top of it. This is a difficult situation. We try to deter the robbery. That's what the group is working on. What really deters a robber? What changes their decision? These small tactics. There's no one magic silver thing, but there are a lot of things that add up. And it's some of the little things that you kind of miss if you're not looking at it. And the other is once a robbery does happen in your store, for us, it's really minimizing the time that the robber's in the store. So we don't create an event that turns into an injury or a fatality. So that's the other piece of the puzzle that we're trying to piece. Once a robber just makes that decision, how fast can we get them out of the building? Because if you do the research, those that were injured or killed either fought back against a robber, or there was a lot of time that the robbers in the store and a third party interjected themselves into an equation, and then there was fatalities and injuries. So we do things measuring the seconds to get them out of the store once they commit. So there's two big pieces here. And then the third is giving enough information for law enforcement to go catch the guy.
Right.
And we're playing in that space with law enforcement, we're playing in the space with the states, and now we're starting in Zone 5 in the social media.
And your other colleagues with CVS and Walgreens, are all of you kind of working together on this?
That's the beauty of retail, right? I
Sure.
mean, you and I have been around a long time in asset protection, and we're competitors. But when it comes to something like this, we are working very closely together. Rite Aid, CVS, and Walgreens kind of started it. Kroger joined us. Now we've got 7-Eleven. I mean, we've got all these that Reed talked about, and we are sharing real information, real tactics, and have a tremendous collaborative process. Because what works for one could work for them all.
Connectedness.
I mean, this research is going to take a considerable period of time.
To do it right, I mean, we do, it's like a good pharmacy study. If something's looking promising, it's almost unethical to hold it back.
Right.
But so we can keep doing repeated measures to see, but you don't want to, you want to get something out there too.
Right.
It's working.
Can you talk to some of the critical and major part of your project is what you're doing? Can you talk to some of the trends in the industry, number one? And have there been any wins, number two, so to speak? And I'll open this up to Bob and Kevin.
Yeah, so I think from a trend standpoint, I think Bob kind of mentioned earlier, but we were seeing that robberies are getting a little bit more violent, right? And I think to Bob's point earlier, if you push them, if you resist, that's when they start to get violent. We just had at Kroger, we just had a big ring down in the Houston market over the holiday season, and they were becoming violent, but they were almost like a serial gang, if you want to call it that, right? So hitting this almost 40 times in our Houston stores. So to Bob's point, I think it's important to get them out and quickly as possible to keep our associates and our customers safe. I think from a win standpoint, I think that, and Bob and Reed touched on this earlier, I think we're closing the gap with the law enforcement folks, and we're starting to have a better partnership with law enforcement and the retailers. And to Reed's point earlier, the violent crime group that I chair with LPRC, we're having these summits. So we had a summit in Houston, we had one in Jacksonville, we had one in Baltimore. We brought together 16 plus retailers along with law enforcement, and it's an all-day summit where we just kind of brainstorm and share resources and network and figure out how we can go after this together. And that's been a big success, is partnering with the law enforcement and getting them to respond and getting them to be on, much more quicker on our side to help us with these crimes.
How long has that been going on, this major collaboration, this size effort? I mean,
This is our third year.
Yeah.
okay. So almost corresponds with when they started increasing a little over 4 years ago,
Yeah.
basically.
We used to almost have to not beg retailers, but say, let's look at this. If your environment's not, your customer doesn't believe it's safe and secure, it doesn't matter how much cool stuff you have or how neat your environment is, they're not going to come there, or at least not when it's convenient in the hours of darkness. So this is a strategic move by your organization to help make your parking lot feel like you're already at that location, not that you've got to survive between your vehicle and the front door, and then it's all pleasant and great music and good stuff.
Let me add something, Gus, that OSHA is spending a lot of time in this area now. And we've had many conversations. They have some perceptions of what deterrent is. Some of those are dated. And that's why, as an industry, we've got to take some of the lead here to be able not only to protect our associates, but educate the government on things that are really working tactically. And that's why LPRC is so important to this process, because it has academic validation on some of the tactics that are working. And there's a very interesting conversations, but this is on their radar. And they've already established some guidelines that are out there.
Yeah, I've seen them. I've seen it.
So we're trying to move from anecdote to evidence-based practice, and that's part of it. So instead of personal injury lawyers or expert witnesses or the government, just here it is, here's how it works. We're trying to say, look, we're developing frameworks with evidence and then validating and building. That's what science is. And so there's a framework and there's evidence. So it's evidence-based practice. And now Bob and his counterparts, they've got a strong framework and they have evidence to support what they're doing and why and how. And we always believe it's not just doing something, it really is how you do it. And we found many things that they didn't seem to be working. Stop. Let's see, how does that affect the offender's decision? Let's dial that in. okay, now we're starting to see it work.
Test and learn, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So, exactly.
So where is it going? I mean, how long do you think it's going to take to really get a handle on this? And let me back up a little bit. When did this trend start? Simple questions.
I think these guys are best to answer that. When did you start seeing your needles
Trent,
moving?
The robbery increases. If you were to look at, was there a moment in time when it just started happening? They started increasing.
Well, if you look at some of the data, yeah, I mean, you have to go to FBI data.
Right.
But there is certainly some data that we have shared amongst retailers
Right.
with Reed. We don't know each other's data, but collaboratively. And you could certainly see a pickup around 2007, 2008, where all of a sudden, at least in drugstore, I can only speak for drugstore on this one. You know, Gus, as you know, in my career, I've been in 4 different types of trade.
Right.
Never had the issue before. Never really had it in grocery as much as it is today. But drugstore was a big deal, like convenience. But we did see a pickup 2007, 2008. And when I joined Rite Aid in 2010, it was a pretty significant issue for us, daily. And some of the tactics we've applied, some of the things we've done, we've seen a softening of that trend. It's what some of the stuff we're doing is working.
Well, and there's some government agencies kind of connecting it to the legislative efforts on the part of the states with opiate restrictions, and coming down on the doctors and kind of tightening that over the last 4, 5, 6 years.
Yeah.
With a certain attorney general actually saying it would double, and he predicted it. But I'll leave the state unnamed.
Right. Yeah, I think we both know that. There's been some very progressive states we've worked with, where we've worked with the AG, we've worked with the drug czars, worked with the governor. They've followed some of the processes we suggested, and they've seen significant reduction in pharmacy robberies for opioids. Significant.
So all the work that the team is doing, that the council is doing, end result, are we going to be able to reverse the trend? Are we going to be able to make an impact? When is that going to be? I mean, any possible thoughts there?
I don't know. I think some of the, Bob kind of mentioned it, this defense in depth, but you see leading indicators. So wait a minute. The frequency of robbery attempts is like this. Maybe successful robbery as a rate start to go down a little bit, and then maybe you see also you're getting people out the door quicker, and so violence goes down, but then you start to see maybe overall attempts start to go down.
Right.
But I think our next step in an innovation chain, lab, stores, and then now to a cluster like Baltimore, I think that's where we're really going to see some nice changes. And we can do a lot of, Kevin mentioned test and learn. In that kind of cluster, everybody's learning together in there quicker. In a tough environment. And we have law enforcement buy-in, everything's set, the stage is set, including all the robbers who are in there.
Congratulations.
Some of the guys we're working with, they're having a dozen armed robberies a weekend,
Yeah.
and so on. So I think that's where we can more quickly get an idea what the impact is.
Right. Well, guys, thanks for taking the time today. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Our pleasure.
Well, that's it for this episode, ladies and gentlemen. We'd like to thank you for taking the time. And meanwhile, let's keep them all safe out there.